Hey guys, what is up? I gotta be honest with you. Today's story has me absolutely fuming, like shaking with rage. We are looking at a level of family betrayal that is so toxic, so incredibly manipulative. It actually makes me sick to my stomach. If your own flesh and blood did this to you, I don't think you could ever recover. Let's just jump right into this madness. I was shoulder deep in white oak logs and hickory chips when my mother walked into the kitchen, her face wearing that exact expression I'd grown to dread. It was the one that meant she and Dad had been discussing my future again. "Arthur," she started, wringing her hands nervously in her expensive designer coat that looked entirely out of place in my smokehouse. "Your father and I have been thinking." I kept tending the fire, letting the familiar, scorching heat ground me. The early morning sunlight streamed through the industrial windows of iron and oak, catching on the heavy black iron smokers and the copper taps I'd carefully installed with my own two hands when I gutted and renovated this place. Every single detail of this rustic cafe and smokehouse had my blood, sweat, and fingerprints on it. From the reclaimed wood tables I'd sanded down myself to the carefully curated menu of artisanal sourdough and 14-hour smoked brisket. "Let me guess," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, wiping grease and soot on my canvas apron. "It's about Richard taking over." She brightened, seemingly relieved that she wouldn't have to break the news herself. "Yes, you know how he's been struggling since losing his job at the investment firm. Your father thinks this would be perfect for him. He has his MBA after all." I laughed, but it was a harsh, scraping sound that held absolutely no humor. "Mom, Richard doesn't know the first thing about running a smokehouse or a cafe. He's never worked a day of hard labor in his life. He doesn't even know how to flip a burger in his own backyard. He was fired for making a reckless trade that cost his firm $2.5 million. But he understands business," she pressed on, stepping back as a puff of wood smoke drifted her way, waving her manicured hand in front of her face. "Numbers, corporate management, scalability. All those things you struggle with." I finally stopped working, slamming the heavy iron door of the smoker shut. The clang echoed through the empty restaurant. I turned to face her fully. "Struggle with? Mom, look around. I've turned a massive profit every single month for the last 18 months. I have a line of customers out the door every weekend. My regulars are veterans and mechanics who come here because we respect the craft. We make real food." But I could see my words bouncing right off her. In my parents' eyes, I would always just be the blue-collar, stubborn son who dropped out of college to work in kitchens and play with fire. Meanwhile, Richard would always be the golden child, the man in the silk suit. Even after failing spectacularly, even after being escorted out of his corporate skyscraper by security, he was still their genius. "Your father's already discussed it with Richard," she continued, her tone shifting to that patronizing pitch as if I hadn't spoken at all. "He's very excited about the opportunity. Think about it, Arthur. You could just focus on what you love, the cooking, the fire, and let Richard handle the real business side. He wants to franchise." I wiped my hands on a rag, staring at her in disbelief. "This is my business, Mom. I built iron and oak from nothing. I put in 100-hour weeks. Dad may have co-signed the initial loan because the bank wouldn't look at a 20-something line cook. But I'm the one who paid the mortgage every month. I made this. Honey, we just want what's best for everyone. Richard needs this. He needs to get back on his feet." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "My sweat doesn't count because I don't wear a tie?" "Don't be dramatic, Arthur," she sighed, checking her watch. "Your father's already drawn up the papers. Richard will be taking over as managing director starting next week." "Are you kidding me right now? He built this place with his own bare hands, sweat, and blood, and they are just handing it over to the golden child who blew $2.5 million on a reckless trade. The entitlement is just, wow. How would you guys react if your parents completely destroyed your life's work just to coddle your useless brother?" The world tilted sideways for a fraction of a second. The betrayal tasted like ash in my mouth. I knew right then, standing in the glow of the embers, that the family I thought I had was dead. They didn't see a son. They saw a safety net for their favorite child. And they were about to tear my life's work apart just to give him a softer place to land. Dad can't do that, I told her, my voice hard. But even as the words left my mouth, the cold, heavy reality settled into my gut. I remembered the fine print on the loan documents. Because I had no collateral at 25, my father's co-signature had come with legally binding conditions. He held a massive lien on the property and the LLC. Conditions I had foolishly, blindly agreed to because I believed in family. I never thought my own flesh and blood would actually weaponize them against me. He can, Arthur, and he will, she said softly, but there was a steel edge to her voice now. If you fight this, he will call in the loan. You can't afford to buy out his equity stake, and we both know it. Bloody hell. That is not a mother. That is a monster. Weaponizing a loan you co-signed to help your son, just to steal his successful business? I can't even process how evil that is. Would you ever speak to your parents again if they pulled a stunt like this? She turned and walked out, leaving me alone with the smell of burning wood and the crushing weight of realization. I had been completely outplayed by the people who raised me, but the nightmare was only just beginning. It wasn't until I went back to my small office to check my personal finances that the true, terrifying scope of Richard's malice hit me. I logged into my banking portal, intending to see how much cash I had to float myself if I walked away. The screen loaded. My checking account read $14.12. My savings account, which held the entirety of my life safety net. Money I had bled for, money saved from skipping meals and working double shifts for years, read $0. My heart slammed against my ribs. I refreshed the page. I hit it again, my hands shaking. $0. I clicked into the transaction history. There it was. A massive, sweeping transfer of $22,000, executed just 48 hours ago. It had been moved to an external account. Panic turned into a blinding, suffocating rage. When I first started the business, my father had insisted on being a guarantor on my personal accounts to help build my credit score, a relic of an old banking setup we never severed. Richard, with his background in finance and his intimate knowledge of our father's passwords and accounts, had found the loophole. I grabbed my phone and dialed Richard. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, little brother." His smooth, arrogant voice drifted through the speaker. "Where is my money, Richard? Where is my 22 grand? I roared, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the desk. He chuckled, a genuine, relaxed chuckle. "Oh, that. Consider it an administrative transfer. I needed a little capital to clear up some personal liabilities before I take the helm of the company. It's a loan, Arthur. You'll get it back once I scale iron and oak and take it national." What the hell? This is straight up theft. He literally wiped out his life savings for crypto and gambling losses. And he has the audacity to call it an administrative transfer? I am seeing red right now. Have any of you ever had a family member financially abuse you like this? "You stole it," I shouted, kicking the heavy wooden desk. "You drained my personal savings to pay off your degenerate crypto losses and your gambling debts. You piece of garbage. That was everything I had. Keep your voice down," he snapped, the fake warmth vanishing. "Dad authorized me to use the family's shared financial resources to restructure. You live like a monk anyway, what do you need it for? Listen, don't make this ugly. You have no money to hire a lawyer now. You have no leverage. You do what Dad says, you stay in the kitchen, and you'll get a nice little salary." He hung up. I stood there in the quiet office, the phone slipping from my hand. He hadn't just taken my business. He had financially gutted me. He had made sure I was entirely, hopelessly crippled so I couldn't fight back, couldn't hire a lawyer, couldn't even rent a new apartment if I left. I was trapped. A lesser man would have broken down right there. A lesser man would have cried, or begged, or accepted his fate as a kitchen slave to a man in a silk suit. But as I stared at the zero on that screen, the panic faded. It was replaced by something else. Something cold, dark, and utterly absolute. I looked at the scars on my forearms from years of working the pits. I looked at the calluses on my hands. I knew how to survive the heat. Richard didn't. He had just stolen from a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. That evening, the heavy wooden doors of iron and oak locked behind the last customer. The smell of smoked brisket and stale beer lingered in the air. My father and Richard walked in. Richard was wearing a tailored navy suit, utterly ridiculous for a smokehouse, stepping carefully to avoid any grease on the floorboards. My father walked beside him, chest puffed out, proud of his real businessman's son. I was waiting for them at the main bar, wiping down the copper counter with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "All right, Arthur," Richard said, pulling up a bar stool but refusing to sit on it. He slapped a leather-bound tablet onto the bar. "Let's get this transition over with. I've been reviewing the financials. Your margins are atrocious." "I use prime beef, Richard," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I use local white oak. It costs money." "It's a waste of money," he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "We're going to streamline operations. We cut the prime brisket, switch to frozen, pre-injected meats. We ditch the overnight wood smoking. We can buy liquid smoke and convection ovens. We focus on mass market appeal, franchise models, high volume, low overhead." My father nodded approvingly. "Richard has an aggressive growth strategy, Arthur. It's time this place grew up." I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had let his eldest son rob me blind. I didn't mention the $22,000. I knew Dad would either excuse it or deny it. There was no point in pleading to a rigged jury. "The regulars won't eat that garbage," I said simply. "These are mechanics, bikers, and veterans. They know what real barbecue tastes like. They'll eat what we give them," Richard sneered, his true arrogance shining through. "Don't be difficult, Arthur. This is for the best. You can stay in the back, keep playing with your little fires, and leave the real business to someone who actually understands economics." He looked at me with that familiar, patronizing smirk. The same smirk he wore when he broke my toys as a kid and blamed me. I reached into the pocket of my grease-stained jeans. My fingers brushed against my keys. The keychain was a small, heavy steel wrench, a gift from a Vietnam vet who was my very first customer on opening day. It represented everything I believed in: hard work, durability, grit. I pulled the keys out and dropped them on the copper bar. They landed with a heavy, metallic clink that echoed in the empty restaurant. "Go ahead," I said, staring dead into Richard's eyes. My voice was low, smooth, and lethal. "Take it. Since you're the corporate genius of the family, you must know better than me." Richard blinked, surprised by the lack of resistance, but his greed quickly overtook his confusion. He snatched the keys off the bar like a hungry dog. "Sensible choice," my father grunted, looking relieved. "You're doing the right thing, son. You'll see." "Oh, I'll see," I replied. I turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen doors. I didn't stop at the office. I didn't pack a box of belongings. I just grabbed my battered leather jacket off the hook and walked out the back alley door into the cool night air. What Richard, the MBA genius, didn't know was that for the last 8 hours, while I was pretending to accept my fate, I had been busy. Very busy. Deep in the pocket of my jacket was a high-capacity solid-state drive. On it was every single proprietary spice rub recipe, every smoking temperature log, the entire VIP customer database, and the contact files for every premium supplier I had spent 2 years cultivating. I didn't just leave them a restaurant. I left them a hollow shell. They had the building, but I had the soul of iron and oak in my pocket. And as I walked down the alley, dead broke, betrayed by my own blood, I didn't feel defeated. I felt dangerous. Yes, that is exactly what you want to see in this situation. He didn't just walk away, he gutted the entire operation. Let Richard play CEO in an empty shell. How long do you guys give Richard before the entire business crashes and burns without those recipes? The first few weeks were brutal. With my bank accounts drained to zero, I was entirely dependent on the cash tips I had stashed in a coffee can under my mattress. Barely enough to cover a month of rent in my tiny apartment. But I refused to let the panic win. I needed income, and more importantly, I needed to stay sharp. I walked 3 miles across town to an old, run-down diner tucked away in an industrial park. It was owned by Old Man Henderson, a 70-year-old Marine Corps veteran with hands like tanned leather and a voice like gravel grinding in a blender. Henderson had been a regular at Iron and Oak. He knew my brisket. He knew my work ethic. I walked in through the back door and found him scrubbing down a flat-top grill. "I need a job, Henderson," I said, no pride, no ego. "Cash under the table. Sweeping, washing dishes, working the line. Whatever you got." He stopped scrubbing, leaned on his scraper, and looked me up and down. He had heard the rumors. Small towns talk, and the restaurant industry talks louder. "I hear your suit-wearing brother is running your pits now." "He's running them into the ground," I corrected. "I need to survive until the crash." Henderson nodded slowly. "Minimum wage. You clean the grease traps, you prep the potatoes, you don't complain. Starts tomorrow at 4 a.m. Done." Working for Henderson was a brutal return to the basics. It was backbreaking, anonymous labor. But it was honest. While Richard was sitting in my custom-built office playing CEO, I was elbow-deep in bleach and potato peels. But I wasn't just surviving. I was learning. Henderson was a masterclass in endurance. "The problem with boys in suits," Henderson told me one morning as we watched the sun come up over the loading dock, drinking bitter black coffee, "is they think business is lived on a spreadsheet. They don't understand that a restaurant is a living, breathing beast. It demands sacrifice. Wood needs time to burn. Meat needs time to tenderize. You can't fast-track respect. Your brother is an impatient man. And impatient men always hang themselves." I took his words to heart. I became a ghost, operating in the shadows, but I never took my eyes off Iron and Oak. I had a spy on the inside. Sarah, one of my toughest waitresses and a loyal friend, had stayed behind at the smokehouse. Every night, my burner phone would light up with text messages from her, detailing the systematic destruction of my dream. "He fired Marcus today," she texted one night. Said paying a pitmaster $18 an hour was a fiscal liability. "He bought an industrial microwave," another text read a week later. "They are microwaving the pulled pork, Arthur. It smells like wet cardboard." Microwaving pulled pork? Oh dearie me. That is an absolute crime against food. Richard is digging his own grave and Arthur is just patiently waiting with the shovel. Do you guys think Arthur should take the business back when it fails, or just let them drown in their own debt? I saved every text. I documented every change. I was building a dossier. I spent my evenings after my shift at the diner sitting at my kitchen table, plotting. I called my old suppliers, the men who brought the white oak, the farmers who provided the prime beef. I explained the situation to them off the record. I told them to demand cash on delivery from Richard. I told them not to extend him a single dime of credit. I was sharpening my knife, waiting for the beast to expose its neck. I didn't just want to take my restaurant back. I wanted to ensure that Richard would never, ever be able to steal from anyone again. I was going to let him build his corporate house of cards, and then I was going to kick the table out from under him. It didn't take long for Richard's mass-market appeal to turn the restaurant into an absolute joke. By the second month, the transformation was complete, and the updates Sarah sent me made my blood boil. Richard's vision of a modern business was a sterile, soulless tragedy. He ripped out the heavy, reclaimed wood tables and replaced them with cheap, sticky vinyl booths that squeaked every time you moved. He tore down the vintage neon signs and the bulletin board where local mechanics and veterans pinned their business cards. In their place, he mounted 6 massive flat-screen televisions blaring sports betting commercials and daytime talk shows on a loop. But the worst offense, the ultimate sin, was what he did to the food. Without Marcus the pitmaster, and without me, Richard had no idea how to operate the heavy iron smokers. So he just stopped using them. He bought cheap, frozen, pre-cooked meat from a discount commercial supplier. He had the kitchen staff boil it in plastic bags and then slather it in high-fructose corn syrup barbecue sauce from a plastic gallon jug. To mimic the smell of the smokehouse, he had them spray chemical liquid smoke onto the plates. It was an insult to the craft. It was an insult to the animals that died for it. It was food fit for a landfill. I sat in my dark apartment, reading a text from Sarah. The biker club came in today. Big Mike took one bite of the ribs, spit it out on the floor, and told Richard to go to hell. They walked out without paying. Richard threatened to call the cops, and Mike just laughed in his face. I couldn't help but smile. You can't fool blue-collar men. You can't put a cheap suit on a pig and call it steak. Richard tried to compensate for the loss of the regulars by running aggressive, expensive marketing campaigns. He hired a social media PR firm. He printed thousands of 2-for-1 discount coupons, desperately trying to drag in the cheap, fast food crowd. He was bleeding money, throwing good cash after bad, desperately trying to force his corporate formulas onto a business that required soul. He treated the staff like machinery. He cut their hours to avoid paying benefits. He instituted a 3 strikes rule for being late, no matter the excuse. Turnover skyrocketed. The kitchen became a revolving door of miserable, underpaid kids who didn't care about the food, because the owner didn't care about them. My parents, blind as ever, thought he was doing brilliantly because he showed them colorful pie charts and projected revenue graphs. They didn't see the rotting foundation. They only saw the glossy PowerPoint presentations he brought to Sunday dinner. But I saw it. I saw the Google reviews plummeting from a proud 4.8 stars down to a dismal 2.1. The reviews were brutal, written by angry men who felt betrayed. Used to be the best brisket in the state. Now it tastes like a burnt tire boiled in ketchup. The new management is a joke. Fake smoke, fake meat, fake smiles. Don't waste your money. Iron and Oak is dead. Every 1-star review was a nail in his coffin. And I was standing by with the hammer. Month 4 arrived, and the bleeding became a hemorrhage. The facade Richard had so carefully constructed for our parents began to shatter violently. I was scrubbing the grease traps at Henderson's Diner when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a number I recognized, Frank, the owner of the local lumber yard who supplied the white oak logs. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped out into the alley to take the call. Arthur. Frank's voice was tight, agitated. I know you're not running the show over there anymore, but I need to talk to someone who actually understands how things work. Your brother is dodging my calls. What's the problem, Frank? I asked, leaning against the brick wall, already knowing the answer. He's 60 days past due on his wood deliveries. And the last time I sent a driver over there to collect, Richard told him that net 90 payment terms were standard corporate practice. I'm not a damn corporation, Arthur. I'm a small business. If he doesn't pay up by Friday, I'm cutting off the supply. Cut him off, Frank, I said coldly. Don't give him another splinter until he pays in cash. Frank paused. You sure about that, kid? It's your name on the sign outside. Not anymore, it isn't. Let him burn. That was the first domino. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone rang constantly. The meat supplier, the beverage distributor, even the company that serviced the HVAC system. Richard was stiffing everyone. He was moving money around, robbing Peter to pay Paul, desperately trying to keep the lights on while maintaining his lavish personal lifestyle. The $22,000 he had stolen from me was long gone, vaporized in his crypto wallets and poker games. Then came the call I had been anticipating for 4 months. I was sitting in my apartment, eating a bowl of cheap ramen noodles, when the screen flashed with Mom. I let it ring 4 times, letting the tension build, before I finally swiped to answer. Hello, I said, keeping my voice flat, entirely devoid of emotion. Arthur, she said. Her voice was breathless, panicked, stripping away all the arrogant polish she usually carried. Oh, Arthur. Thank God you picked up. What do you want, Mom? I'm busy. It's about the restaurant, she stammered. Richard is having a little bit of trouble with the staff, and some of the local vendors are being very unreasonable. Your father is getting worried about the loan payments. I stared at the peeling paint on my wall. Sounds like a corporate management problem. Richard has an MBA. I'm sure he can optimize his way out of it. Don't be like that, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please. The customers are gone, Arthur. They just stopped coming. Richard says it's seasonal, but we drove by on a Saturday night and the parking lot was empty. We need you. You need me? I asked, a bitter smile touching my lips. Yes, Richard is willing to bring you back. He said you can be the assistant manager. You can go back into the kitchen, fix the recipes, bring the old crowd back. He'll even pay you a slightly higher salary. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless for a second. They still didn't get it. They still thought I was a dog they could whistle for when the wolves showed up. They thought I would come crawling back to clean up the catastrophic mess my thief of a brother had made, just to accept a demotion in my own building. Listen to me very carefully, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. I wouldn't walk back into that building right now if it was on fire and you handed me a hose. You made your choice. You chose the man in the suit. Now die with him. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. The trap was fully set. The bait had been taken. The beast was starving, panicked, and bleeding out. I looked at the thick stack of files on my kitchen table. The financial records, the supplier complaints, the photographic evidence of health code violations Sarah had smuggled out to me. I wasn't just going to take Iron and Oak back. I was going to raise Richard's life to the absolute ground. The clock was ticking, and the executioner was ready. By the 7th month, Iron and Oak wasn't just bleeding. It was on life support, and the plug was already slipping from the socket. There is a specific, undeniable smell to a dying restaurant. It's not just the smell of stale grease or unwashed floors, though there was plenty of that under Richard's regime. It's the smell of desperation. It's the scent of unpaid bills, corner cutting, and a staff that has completely given up. Sarah was still texting me every day, but her messages had turned from angry to just plain exhausted. The end was accelerating. The county health inspector finally showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. Under my watch, we had passed every inspection with flying colors, bordering on obsessive perfection. I used to scrub the cast iron grates myself until my knuckles bled. But Richard had decided that a professional overnight cleaning crew was a redundant expense. He had expected minimum-wage teenagers to deep clean heavy commercial smokers at midnight. Naturally, they didn't. The inspector found grease pooling behind the fryers, expired wholesale meat sitting at unsafe temperatures in the walk-in cooler, and a rat trap in the dry storage that hadn't been checked in weeks. The inspector didn't just write a citation. He slammed a bright yellow, temporarily closed for health violations, sticker on the heavy oak front doors. That yellow sticker was the death knell. It was the public execution of the brand I had built. But Richard wasn't there to face the inspector. He wasn't there to face the humiliated staff. He was a coward through and through. When the pressure got too high, men like Richard didn't grab a bucket and start scrubbing. They looked for the nearest exit. Through my contacts at the local community bank, I learned that Richard had drained the last remaining operating capital from the business account. He had siphoned the meager funds meant for the staff's payroll, claiming it was his executive salary, and booked a first-class ticket to Austin, Texas. He had been bragging to the bartenders across the street that he was moving on to a lucrative cryptocurrency summit, because the local demographic in our town was simply too uneducated to appreciate his business model. He was abandoning the sinking ship, leaving our parents, who had co-signed the massive commercial loan, holding the bag. The bank was 4 months behind on receiving payments. Foreclosure wasn't just a threat anymore. It was scheduled. The bank had already drafted the paperwork to seize not just the restaurant property, but my parents' home, which they had foolishly used as collateral to back Richard's vision. The day after the health inspector shut the place down, the remaining staff walked out. Sarah sent me a photo of the keys left on the sticky vinyl counter. "We're done, Arthur," she wrote. "He didn't pay us for the last 2 weeks. The place is a graveyard." I sat in my dingy apartment, staring at the photo. The anger that had burned inside me for 7 months had crystallized into something cold, sharp, and absolute. The trap had violently snapped shut. The corporate genius had completely destroyed himself. I picked up my phone, not to call Sarah, but to call Henderson. "It's done," I said to the old Marine. "I heard about the yellow sticker. Henderson replied, his voice a low gravel. The wood is chopped, Arthur. Time to light the fire. I took a shower, shaved for the first time in a week, and put on a clean white t-shirt and my heavy leather boots. I brewed a pot of black coffee and set my thick, heavily tabbed leather binder on the small kitchen table. I didn't have to wait long. The reckoning was walking right up my stairs. The knock on my apartment door was weak, hesitant, completely devoid of the arrogant authority my father usually carried. It was the knock of a broken man. I opened the door. There they stood. My father, whose shoulders seemed to have collapsed inward. His face gray and deeply lined with sudden, crushing stress. And my mother, her designer coat looking absurdly out of place in my rundown hallway, her eyes red and puffy from crying. There was no hello. There was no small talk. "Can we come in?" my father asked, his voice cracking. I stepped aside, saying nothing. They walked into my cramped living room, looking around at the cheap furniture, the peeling paint. This was the poverty they had condemned me to so their golden boy could play CEO. "Arthur," my mother started, immediately breaking into tears. "It's gone. It's all gone. The restaurant is boarded up. The bank called your father this morning. They're taking the house, Arthur. They're taking our home." I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms over my chest. I didn't offer them a seat. I didn't offer them a glass of water. I just stared at them with eyes as cold as dead ash. "Where's Richard?" I asked. My father flinched as if I had struck him. He left. He said the macroeconomic conditions weren't favorable. He took the last of the cash and said he had a meeting in Texas. He won't answer our calls. "Imagine that," I said, my voice dripping with venom. The man who blew $2.5 million of a corporate firm's money couldn't manage a barbecue joint. Who could have possibly seen that coming? "Please, son," my father begged, his pride entirely evaporated. He looked like a frightened old man. "We made a mistake. Terrible, terrible mistake. We trusted the wrong things. We trusted the degree instead of the man. But you can fix this. You know the kitchen. You know the customers. If you talk to the bank, if you promise to take over the operations, they might give us a grace period. You have to save the family." "Save the family?" I echoed, pushing myself off the counter. The air in the room suddenly felt dangerously heavy. "You want me to save the family? The same family that handed my life's work over to a thief." "Don't call your brother a thief," my mother sobbed, falling back into her old habits of defending him. "He just made bad business choices." I slammed my fist down on the kitchen table, the crack echoing like a gunshot. My mother shrieked and stepped back. "Bad business choices?" I roared, the rage of 7 months finally breaking off its leash. "Do you want to know what your golden boy did the day you handed him my keys?" Before I even walked out the back door, Richard logged into the family's shared financial portal. He used Dad's guarantor status to bypass my security. He drained my personal savings account, $22,000. Every single cent I bled for, every penny I saved to build my life. He stole it. He transferred it to a shell account to pay off his gambling markers and his crypto debts. The silence that followed was absolute. The color drained completely from my father's face. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, unable to form words. He told us he was just restructuring the capital. My father whispered, the horrifying realization finally sinking into his bones. "He stole it," I repeated, stepping closer to them. "He left me with $14 to my name. You threw me out into the street, and he picked my pockets on the way out. And you stood there and told me I should be grateful to be his line cook." My mother covered her face with her hands, a loud, agonizing wail tearing from her throat. She sank to her knees right there on my cheap linoleum floor. The polished, arrogant woman who had waved away the smoke in my kitchen was gone. She was begging on her knees. "I'm sorry," she wailed. "Oh God, Arthur, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. We didn't know what he was." "You didn't want to know," I corrected her coldly. I looked down at them, feeling no triumph, only a heavy, exhausting disgust. You came here asking me to save you, but I am not here to save this family. I am here to take back exactly what is mine. I turned my back on my weeping mother and walked to the kitchen table. I picked up the thick, heavy leather binder I had spent 7 months compiling. I dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. "Sit down," I commanded. It wasn't a request. My father slowly pulled out a chair, his hands shaking violently. My mother struggled to her feet and sat beside him, unable to look me in the eye. I opened the binder. Inside were perfectly organized, legally binding documents, drawn up by a ruthless corporate attorney that Henderson had introduced me to. "Here is what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady, entirely devoid of mercy. "There will be no grace period with the bank. I have already met with the loan officers. I showed them my real financials from the 18 months I ran the place, and I showed them the garbage Richard produced. They know who the real liability is." I slid the first stack of papers across the table. "You are going to sign 100% of the LLC, the property, and the brand back over to me. Sole ownership. You are going to permanently remove yourselves as co-signers, guarantors, or board members. You will have absolutely zero legal tie to Iron and Oak ever again." My father stared at the papers. "Arthur, if we remove ourselves, the bank will call in the penalty fees. The arrears Richard racked up." "That's right." I cut him off sharply. "You will absorb the $45,000 in debt and late fees that your golden boy accumulated. You backed him. You co-signed his disaster. You pay for it. I am taking the business back clean. I am not paying a single cent for the rot he brought into my house." "Arthur, we don't have that kind of cash lying around," my father pleaded. "We'll have to take out a second mortgage on the house. It will ruin us for years." "Then you better start clipping coupons," I said, leaning over the table, my face inches from his. "Because if you don't sign these papers right now, I walk away. I let the bank take the restaurant, I let them take your house, and I go open a new smokehouse 1 town over under a new name. Your choice, Dad. Sign the paper or lose everything." He looked into my eyes and saw absolutely zero bluff. He reached for the pen with a trembling hand and signed his name, effectively surrendering everything. "I'm not finished," I said, sliding a second sheet of paper forward. "This is a legally drafted public apology. You are going to pay to have this printed in the Sunday edition of the county newspaper. It states, clearly and unequivocally, that removing me from my own business was a catastrophic failure of judgment on your part. It states that Richard was completely incompetent. And it formally apologizes to the community for ruining a local institution." My mother gasped. "Arthur, please. The embarrassment. The whole town will see it. We'll be laughingstocks. You let your son serve microwave trash to veterans," I snapped. "You already are laughingstocks. Sign it." Tears streamed down her face as she took the pen and signed. "One last thing," I said, pulling out a stack of envelopes. "These are letters addressed to Marcus, to Sarah, and to every single employee Richard wrongfully terminated. You are going to sign these letters, offering them their jobs back, and you are going to write a personal check to each of them covering the 2 weeks of back pay Richard stole from them before he ran away." My father looked completely defeated. He didn't even argue. He just took his checkbook out and started writing. He was physically shrinking before my eyes. The arrogant patriarch was gone, replaced by a man who finally realized he had bet everything on a parasite. As they finished signing the last document, the air in the room shifted. I gathered the papers, tapping them neatly against the table. I had everything back. The restaurant was mine. The debt was theirs. The humiliation was public. But I had one more card to play. "You can go now," I said. My father stood up, looking at me with a hollow expression. "Are you satisfied, Arthur? Have you punished us enough?" "I didn't punish you, Dad," I said, walking over to open the apartment door. "You punished yourselves. But if you're worried about Richard getting away with my $22,000, don't be. The real punishment hasn't even started yet." They paused at the doorway, looking back at me with a sudden, renewed sense of dread. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, her voice a fragile whisper. What did you do to your brother? I didn't do anything to him, I replied smoothly. I just shone a light on what he was doing. I walked back to my table and pulled out the final folder. It was thick, heavy, and stamped with official government seals. I didn't hand it to them. I just held it up for them to see. Did you honestly think I spent the last 7 months just washing dishes at a diner and feeling sorry for myself? I asked. Did you think I was just going to let him steal my life savings and walk away to a crypto convention in Texas? Their silence was deafening. When Richard took over, he didn't just mismanage the brisket, I explained, relishing every single word. He committed massive financial fraud. He was paying his personal gambling debts out of the corporate payroll account. He was stiffing vendors and falsifying the tax documents to make the margins look profitable to you. And, most importantly, he illegally wire transferred $22,000 from a co-signed account under false pretenses across state lines to an offshore crypto wallet. My father gripped the doorframe to keep himself from collapsing. Wire fraud, he muttered, his business background finally kicking in. Arthur, that's a federal offense. Exactly, I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. For months ago, I compiled every single bank statement, every bounced check to the vendors, every fake tax ledger he left lying around the office, and the IP tracking data from his crypto transfers. I bundled it all up into a very neat, very undeniable package. I paused, letting the weight of the moment crush them, and I mailed it directly to the Internal Revenue Service, the State Financial Inspector, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. My mother let out a scream, a visceral, horrifying sound of pure maternal panic. She lunged forward, grabbing my shirt. No, Arthur, you didn't. He's your brother. He'll go to prison. I gently but firmly peeled her hands off my shirt and stepped back. He stopped being my brother the day he stole my money and smiled in my face. He's a criminal, and criminals belong in cages. Right on cue, my father's cell phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. He stared at the caller ID. It's a number from Austin, Texas, he choked out. He answered it, putting it on speakerphone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the device. Dad, are you there? It was Richard's voice, but the smooth, arrogant corporate sneer was completely gone. He sounded hysterical. He sounded like a terrified little boy. Richard, where are you? My father asked, his voice breaking. Dad, you have to help me. I'm at the airport in Austin. I was trying to board my flight to Miami, and the TSA pulled me out of line. There are federal agents here. Dad, they have handcuffs. They're talking about wire fraud and tax evasion. They seized my phone. They froze all my accounts. Dad, you need to call a lawyer. You need to wire me money for bail. Right now? My father looked at the phone, then looked at me. I stood there, utterly motionless, my face carved from stone. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I felt justice. Dad, say something. Richard screamed through the speaker, the sound of static and airport background noise mixing with his panic. They're taking me into a back room. Dad. My father took a deep, shuddering breath. The man who had favored the suit over the apron, his entire life, finally realized the true cost of his blindness. I have no money, Richard, my father said, his voice dropping to a dead, hollow monotone. I have no money for a lawyer. I have no money for bail. You ruined us. What do you mean you have no money? Sell the restaurant. Sell the house. Do something. The restaurant isn't ours anymore, my father said, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. And the house belongs to the bank. You're on your own, son. Dad. No. Please. The line went dead. My father slowly lowered the phone. My mother was on the floor again, weeping hysterically, the reality of her golden child being hauled away in handcuffs breaking her completely. I looked at the two of them, the architects of my misery, now completely ruined by their own creation. Don't ever come to my restaurant again, I said. I closed the door in their faces, locking it with a loud, Final click. I walked back to my kitchen, poured the rest of my cold black coffee down the sink, and grabbed my boots. It was time to go to work. The next morning, the sun broke over the horizon, casting a golden light over the heavy oak doors of my restaurant. The yellow, temporarily closed sticker was already gone, scraped off with a razor blade by my own hand. I stood in the center of the dining room. It looked like a disaster zone of cheap plastic and bad decisions. But beneath the garbage, the bones of the place were still strong. The back door opened, and a massive silhouette blocked out the morning light. It was Marcus, my old pitmaster. He walked in, wearing his battered leather apron, looking around at the vinyl booths with deep disgust. "Smells like a hospital in here," Marcus grunted, crossing his massive arms. "Not for long," I replied. Behind him, Sarah walked in, followed by 5 of my old line cooks and waitstaff. They looked at me, a mixture of relief and anticipation in their eyes. "All right, listen up," I said, my voice projecting through the empty room. "We have 48 hours before we officially reopen the doors. The first thing we do is exorcise the demons." I walked over to the nearest flat-screen television, grabbed a crowbar from my toolbox, and ripped the TV off the wall with a loud crunch of drywall and wires. I threw it onto the floor, the screen shattering into 1,000 pieces. The crew cheered. "Tear it all down," I yelled. "Rip out the vinyl. Throw out the frozen meat. Dump the liquid smoke down the drain. We are bringing the soul back to this house." The next 2 days were a blur of grueling, glorious labor. We worked around the clock. We hauled the cheap booths out to the dumpster and brought the heavy reclaimed wood tables out of storage. We scrubbed the kitchen from top to bottom with bleach, degreaser, and boiling water. We tore down the corporate signage and hung the old, neon iron and oak sign back in the window. But the most important moment came on Friday night. Marcus and I stood in front of the massive, custom-built iron smokers. They were cold, neglected, covered in a thin layer of dust. I opened the heavy steel door. "Load her up," I said. Marcus threw in massive logs of seasoned white oak. I struck a match and tossed it in. We stood there in silence as the fire caught, the wood popping and hissing. Within minutes, that unmistakable, deeply intoxicating smell of real wood smoke began to fill the kitchen, pushing out the sterile smell of Richard's failures. We loaded 50 prime briskets, seasoned with my proprietary rub, into the racks. We were going to smoke them low and slow for 16 hours. On Saturday morning, at 11 a.m., I walked over to the front door and unlocked it. I pushed the doors open. The line stretched around the block. Word had spread. The newspaper apology had run, the social media pages were updated, and the town knew that the Betrayal iron and oak was back. Standing at the very front of the line was a massive group of local veterans, wearing their jackets, led by Old Man Henderson. Henderson looked at me, sniffed the air, and let out a slow, satisfied nod. "Smells like a man's work," he rasped. "Welcome home, boys," I said, stepping aside. The rush was biblical. For 12 straight hours, we didn't stop moving. The sound of cleavers chopping through perfectly tender brisket, the clinking of beer glasses, the loud, booming laughter of men eating real food. It was chaotic, it was exhausting, and it was beautiful. When we finally locked the doors at midnight, we had completely sold out of food. Every single scrap of meat was gone. The cash register was overflowing. I sat at the bar, covered in soot, sweat, and grease, drinking a cold beer with Marcus. My body ached in that deep, satisfying way that only comes from honest labor. I looked around my restaurant. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a fortress, and nobody would ever take it from me again. 18 months later, the heavy iron doors of iron and oak swung open, letting in the brisk autumn air. The restaurant was packed to the gills. We had expanded, knocking down the wall to the adjacent building to double our seating capacity and add a third smoker to the pit room. The profits were higher than they had ever been in the history of the company. I was standing at the cutting station, carving a massive slab of ribs, when Sarah tapped me on the shoulder. "Hey boss, you have an applicant for the dishwasher position." He's waiting in the back office. I wiped my knife, handed the carving fork to Marcus, and walked back to my office. Sitting in the chair was a kid who couldn't have been older than 19. He looked rough around the edges, faded tattoos on his knuckles, a nervous energy in his eyes, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn-out denim jacket. He looked like a kid who had made some mistakes and was trying to figure out how to stop making them. "You looking for work?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Yes, sir," he said, standing up quickly. "I don't have much experience, but I work hard. I swear." I looked at him, seeing a ghost of myself from 15 years ago. "Why a kitchen? Why here?" The kid looked down at his boots, embarrassed. "My family, they tell me I'm wasting my life. They say I should go to community college, get a business degree, sit in a cubicle. They say working with your hands is for losers who can't use their brains. But I can't sit still in a classroom, man. I just want to work." I smiled. A real, genuine smile. I walked over to my desk and sat down. Behind me, framed on the wall, wasn't a culinary degree or an MBA. It was a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local financial executive Richard, last name, sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud." Below that clipping was the written apology my parents had published, admitting their absolute failure to recognize the value of hard work over a fancy title. They lived in a small rented apartment on the other side of town now. I hadn't spoken to them since the day I locked them out of my apartment, and I never intended to. They made their choice, and they were living with the ghost of the son they ruined. I looked back at the kid. "Let me tell you something about the men who wear suits and look down on the men who wear aprons," I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of everything I had survived. "They think the world is built on spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. They think they can optimize their way out of hard work. But when the fire actually starts, they panic. They steal. And they burn." I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a heavy canvas apron, and tossed it to him. He caught it, surprised. "In this life, a piece of paper doesn't make you a man," I told him, looking dead into his eyes. "Integrity makes you a man. Sweat makes you a man. Taking a beating, getting robbed of everything you have, and building it all back with your own 2 hands. That makes you a man." The kid gripped the apron, his posture straightening, a spark of genuine respect lighting up his eyes. "You start tomorrow at 4 a.m., I said. "You clean the grease traps. You prep the wood. You don't complain. If you can survive the heat, I'll teach you how to build a fire that nobody can ever put out." "Yes, sir," he said, nodding firmly. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," I said. He walked out of the office, ready to bleed for his future. I turned back to my desk, listening to the roar of laughter from the dining room, the clatter of plates, and the low, steady hum of the exhaust fans over the smokers. The smell of white oak drifted into the office. It was the smell of victory. It was the smell of survival. I had lost my family, but I had built an empire from the ashes they left behind. I picked up my knife, walked back out to the pits, and went back to work. That story was a wild, infuriating ride. I am honestly disgusted by the parents. They literally enabled a thief and ruined their youngest son's life just because Richard wears a fancy suit and has an MBA. It shows you that to some toxic families, hard work and loyalty mean absolutely nothing compared to a shiny degree and a fake corporate smile. Arthur is an absolute legend for keeping his cool and taking all his proprietary data. That is how you strike back. You don't scream, you don't cry, you just quietly take the soul of the business and let the fake genius destroy himself. I cannot wait for Richard to end up behind bars for his fraud, and I hope Arthur never gives his parents the time of day ever again. User Burger King 42 said, "Arthur needs to press charges for the stolen 22 grand immediately. That's a felony." I hear you, Burger King 42, but I think Arthur knows the cops would take forever, and Richard would just lie and use their dad's cosigner status as an excuse. Sometimes letting a narcissist destroy their own empire is a much sweeter, far more devastating revenge. Then we have Salty Tears 99 who wrote, "Honestly, the parents are worse than Richard. They handed him the gun to shoot Arthur with." Salty Tears 99, you hit the nail right on the head. The betrayal from Richard is bad. But the parents weaponizing the loan? That is the ultimate knife in the back. They deserve to go down with the sinking ship. And finally, BBQ Master flexed with microwaving pulled pork. In Texas, we'd throw him in the smoker for that. Honestly, I couldn't have said it better myself. That is an unforgivable offense.